Over at ITV2 now, it's Beggars and Choosers.
Prince Charles says foot and mouth could lead farmers to suicide. New lead in the hunt for the real IRA taxi bombers. British campaigner beaten up by Mugabe's bodyguards. And Sunderland and Villa battle it out to the end.
From ITN, the ITV News at 10 with Trevor McDonald.
Good evening. Prince Charles spoke today of the desperation felt by farmers coping with foot and mouth disease. Real difficulties which he said could end in suicides. A farm on the Prince's land has been infected with the disease. The outbreak there on the edge of Dartmoor National Park has raised fears that it could spread to 50,000 cattle which graze on common land. The number of foot and mouth cases rose today to 75. Juliet Bremner has our report.
Precautions didn't prevent foot and mouth finding its way onto Dartmoor. A case was confirmed on land owned by the Prince of Wales, who tonight spoke of his fears for farmers.
One of the things actually that is most worrying is the degree of isolation that so many farmers face nowadays, with the rural communities being not quite what they were. And there's a lot of, I think, real difficulty experienced by farmers, leading to complications like suicide and so on. So I do hope that more people will be able to talk to each other in order to help them through this difficult time.
The outbreak on the national park raises the terrible prospect that up to 45,000 animals who graze the common land may have to be slaughtered if the infection spreads. Although ministry vets today played down this most depressing scenario, those living in Dartmoor remain fearful.
Dartmoor is so large, there are so many cases proven in Devon already that we can't relax at all. And I don't think, we try to be optimistic, but one has to, there's several weeks to get through yet.
The countryside is still on high alert, with disinfectant and vigilance amongst their only weapons. Although 9 or 10 new cases are still being confirmed every day, the government says that the disease is under control because they can all be traced back to the original outbreak. What they're really dreading is hearing about a new case that apparently has no links to contaminated animals. But the world of horse racing tonight signalled it was confident the outbreak was being contained. It's lifting its week-long ban and the Cheltenham Festival should now go ahead.
We had to take a view as to what was best for the interests of our sport without prejudicing the national interest. And we're absolutely satisfied on the back of the best possible veterinary advice, on the back of continuing and consistent support from government, that we've taken the right decision to resume on Wednesday.
Cattle arriving at a Scottish abattoir today. Some of the livestock moved under special licence from regions still not infected. For many hard-pressed farmers, this was one of the first positive moves since the crisis began. Juliet Bremner, ITN.
For the first time in 10 days, British meat is on its way to supermarkets tonight. It's the result of the Safe Slaughter programme, which began today. It means some income for those farmers whose livestock remain free of foot and mouth, but will make little difference to supplies in the shops, as Choi explains.
The moment farmers have waited for and shoppers are depending on. Tonight, British meat is back on the move. This is the first 5-ton consignment. Supermarket deliveries are expected tomorrow. For the industry, it's the most important breakthrough in 13 days. For consumers, it will restrict price rises.
There is likely to be a slight increase in price as supply tightens. But once this scheme is fully operational, we would anticipate that prices would come back closer to what normally consumers would expect to pay.
Tonight's restocking is vital. Supermarkets report rocketing sales. Fresh pork, lamb and beef buying is up by as much as 70%. Even poultry is affected. 80% more chicken breasts have been sold. Sales of other goods, including cereals, pasta and tinned food, are up 87% in some stores. For meat buyers, that increased demand means rising costs, falling choice. But the new UK pork will be quick to arrive in supermarkets, so will all mince. Lamb, though, can take 5 days to mature, some steak 3 times that. Meanwhile, imports will take shelf space. New Zealand lamb at 7% more than usual, Danish pork 10% extra. And tonight nobody is promising business or prices as usual.
At the moment we're selling at the prices that we negotiated before foot and mouth started. As and when we have to source from other suppliers, then we'll have to see what the prices are. But I couldn't predict, we don't know.
Right now, the first of the fresh UK supplies is heading towards the shops, but the food industry is warning it could still take weeks before things return to normal, and that's assuming the outbreak doesn't worsen. Even so, tonight is a vital turning point, and the only good news the meat trade has had in this ongoing crisis. Chris Choi, ITN, Central London.
The Irish terrorist who blew up a taxi outside the BBC on Saturday night may have been involved in a road rage incident shortly before the explosion. Another driver in West London said he and the driver of a similar taxi had a heated argument. Here's John Draper.
Tonight at the BBC, police began scaling down their operation, opening up roads that had been closed since the weekend bomb. Earlier, officers had carried out a minute search looking for the smallest clues in the hunt for the Republican dissidents who planted the car bomb. The police also put on display a replica of the taxi the terrorists used, with copies of the false plates. They appealed for witnesses who may have seen it in a road rage incident shortly before the blast.
A witness believes that they had an altercation with the driver of a red cab on Saturday evening. Did somebody else run across this red cab?
The taxi had been packed with high explosive. The real IRA is seen as one of the biggest threats to the peace process. Formed in 1997 after Bertie Ahern and Tony Blair signed the Good Friday Agreement. It became notorious a year later after planting the Omagh bomb, killing 29 people and 2 unborn babies. Last year, its terrorist campaign on the British mainland included a rocket launched on MI6 headquarters. Police believe a cell of 6 terrorists were responsible for the BBC bomb. This evening, security was much more visible, particularly in the City of London. Later this week, the Prime Minister will launch a new round of talks in Belfast aimed at breaking the political deadlock there. But whatever happens, it won't influence the people who planted this bomb. They believe in the use of violence to achieve their objective, a united Ireland. That's why the police think they'll continue to pose a threat. John Draper, ITN, West London.
The American Vice President Dick Cheney is back in hospital tonight. Mr. Cheney, seen here on the campaign trail with George W. Bush, checked himself into hospital after experiencing mild chest pains. Mr. Cheney has a history of heart attacks. He's had 4 in all. The last, a minor one, happened during the election campaign in November. The human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell was knocked unconscious today by security men guarding Zimbabwe's President Mugabe. Mr. Tatchell was attacked when he tried to make a citizen's arrest in Brussels. An ITN camera crew filmed what happened. Our reporter Bill Neely was there.
President Mugabe's visit to Europe is controversial. His country is racked by murder and intimidation. He tolerates little dissent. No sooner had he arrived than the British human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell tried to arrest him.
I put you under arrest on charges of torture under the United Nations Convention Against Torture.
Mr. Tatchell was then set upon by the President's security guards for the first, but not the last time. The President was ushered out. Mr. Tatchell gave chase.
Under Belgian law,
the Zimbabwean Secret Service then turned on journalists.
President Mugabe, do you condemn the latest killings in your country? The latest killing of a farmer?
President Mugabe leaves, but 3 of his government officials wait to attack Mr. Tatchell. One says, "We'll find you and we'll kill you." Mr. Tatchell is dazed. His Zimbabwean attacker denies doing anything.
What do you work for? Who do you work for?
You just hit him.
No!
Other Zimbabwean officials attack again. Mr. Tatchell is left unconscious. Robert Mugabe was here in the guise of a peacemaker, taking part in talks to end Africa's biggest war in Congo. The campaigner says Robert Mugabe is no peacemaker.
The treatment I received at the hands of the Zimbabwean Secret Service is the treatment they routinely hand out to the people of Zimbabwe. Only if I'd been in Zimbabwe, they probably would have shot me.
Mr. Mugabe is now heading for Paris, where tomorrow he'll meet President Chirac and once again be the focus of protest at the violence and repression in Zimbabwe. He refuses to visit Britain. Bill Neely, ITN, Brussels.
Police have now identified all 10 people who died in the Selby train crash. More families were given the terrible news today. The last 4 to be named included one man whose father had been killed in a rail crash 20 years ago. Tonight, as Colin Baker reports, work continues to clear the track.
Most of the 15 coal wagons have now been taken away. Tonight, the 2 or 3 which remain are being emptied, tons of coal being sucked out by huge waste disposal machines to make them lighter for lifting by crane tomorrow. One of the 2 giant cranes is also being dismantled tonight. The coaches and locomotives on each side of the bridge were lifted off the track earlier. The clearing up operation has been swift. Despite its obvious difficulties and dangers, this operation could be complete within 48 hours. But the most important thing today is official confirmation that there are no more victims. One of the 10 who died was internationally renowned Professor Stephen Baldwin, a specialist in child psychology at Teesside University. He was on his way to London to give a speech.
He was a very, very delightful colleague. He had a great sense of humour. He was a very private man. He was very modest about his own abilities, always giving credit to others.
Also named today was Alan Ensor, a 44-year-old civil engineering project manager from York, and Clive Vigin, a 39-year-old business manager who also lived in York with his mother. Mr. Vigin's father was killed in a rail crash 20 years ago. Another victim was Christopher Terry, a 30-year-old church warden from York. This afternoon, his mother and sister came to the crash site. They were also shown the floral tributes placed on the bridge. With most of the wreckage gone, the recovery teams have been searching the site for personal belongings. Tomorrow, an interim report into the cause of the crash is expected to be published. Colin Baker, ITN, Great Heck, North Yorkshire.
In Portugal, divers have been trying to recover the bodies of 70 people who died when a road bridge collapsed. Most were passengers on a double-decker bus which plunged into a deep, fast-flowing river. One minister has resigned after it emerged that the government had been warned that the bridge was unsafe 3 years ago, but did nothing about it. Portugal has declared 2 days of national mourning. Robert Moore reports.
By daylight, all hope of finding survivors had gone, as the horrifying scale of the bridge collapse became apparent. A large span had simply vanished. It appears the bridge was swept away by the floodwaters. A double-decker bus and 2 cars plunged 50 metres down into the river. Amid the torrent, rescuers are experiencing severe difficulties in locating the wreckage and retrieving the bodies. It's feared that as many as 70 people may have drowned. Only a few bodies have so far been recovered, while local people and grieving relatives gather at the banks of the river waiting for news. The Portuguese Prime Minister Antonio Guterres visited the scene of the disaster near the town of Castelo do Paiva, 200 miles north of Lisbon. Even as the rescuers first searched for survivors amid the fog and darkness, it became a political scandal as well. For while local officials had long identified the bridge as no longer safe, the government never provided the funds for a replacement. The Minister of Infrastructure has resigned, accepting political responsibility for the tragedy. Those on the bus were local people on a day trip to enjoy the countryside. The collapse of the bridge, built over 100 years ago, is now the subject of an inquiry, while the Portuguese people prepare for 2 days of national mourning. Robert Moore, ITN.
The future of football's transfer system was finalised tonight after months of hard bargaining with a deal agreed by the European Commission and football's ruling bodies. The maximum length of a player's contract will now be 5 years, with a fixed period each year when transfers can take place. The Commission had said the current transfer system broke employment laws. Football, Sunderland missed a chance to go third in the Premiership tonight. They could only manage a 1-1 draw at home to Aston Villa. And even then, they left it late in the game to get the equaliser. Our sports reporter Peter Staunton watched the hard-fought match.
For 45 minutes last week, Villa's David James was England's #1 choice goalkeeper. Tonight he had a game which will give him and the supporters nightmares. A botched clearance which fell to Sunderland's Niall Quinn should have cost his side a goal. Then there was the odd drop ball under pressure. And still in the first half, another one dropped under no pressure at all. Calamity James, as he used to be known, resorted to the unorthodox, but it worked and somehow the score stayed 0-0 until the second half. When football being the unpredictable game it is, Villa scored against the run of play. Joachim's goal looked to have decided the issue, but James wasn't finished yet. The free kick eventually fell to Gavin McCann, who salvaged a valuable point for the team which is chasing a place in the Champions League. Peter Staunton, ITN Sport.
Time for tonight's headlines again. Prince Charles has said he's worried that the foot-and-mouth crisis could lead to suicides among farmers. He said the spread of the disease was another desperate blow for the industry. Police hunting the Irish terrorist who bombed the BBC believe he may have been involved in a road rage incident shortly before the explosion. And the human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell was knocked unconscious during scuffles with President Mugabe's security men in Brussels. Mr. Tatchell was trying to make a citizen's arrest. And that's News at 10 tonight. Coming next on ITV, Dennis Norden's Laughter by Royal Command. We are back tomorrow. From all of us here, goodbye.